Barbara Payne with the Kentucky Environmental Foundation. And just a little background on this. Brad Van Gilder, who is on, at least see on the little screen here, is on the webinar, had mentioned the Kentucky Environmental Foundation's report to me many months ago now, and as a good model for something that we might do here in Michigan. And we've been knocking ideas around about how to make something similar happen, and even talked about that in person a little bit today. And so I have lots of questions, and hopefully Deborah will answer some of them in her presentation, but also have some time at the end. And she and I talked on the phone back a month or two ago, and I think she gave a really good overview of how this has helped move conversations about energy policy and health issues in the state of Kentucky. And so we're a little different here in Michigan, but I think certainly a lot to learn from the work and the really innovative work of combining health impact assessments with this particular kind of topic. So Deborah, thank you again for joining us, and I'll go ahead and turn it over to you.
Thank you so much, Rory.
Oh wait, can I say one more thing? I'm so sorry.
Sure. Go ahead.
I want to say thank you to Stephanie from Physicians for Social Responsibility, Michigan chapter. I'm with the Michigan Air Michigan Health Coalition, and this is our second sort of tag team effort on doing webinars. We're going to continue to try to give these in the future to give people an opportunity to dig into important topics. And so thanks to Stephanie for hosting it. And Deborah, I'm sorry I've already interrupted you. I will now mute myself.
That's just fine. Thank you very much. A little background on the Kentucky Environmental Foundation. The organization was started as a community-based organization about 25 years ago to address a community concern around the stockpile of nerve gas that is currently located about 8 miles from Berea, which is where our organization is based. Through many years of dedicated communication with legislators and through a extensive round of engaging military and engaging top senators and politicians, the Army was encouraged to move from an incineration approach to dealing with the nerve gas, getting rid of the nerve gas, to a neutralization plant, which was much more acceptable by the community. It reduced air quality concerns. It was a low-pressure system. It was much safer. And at that point in time, health impact assessment as a tool had not really made its way to the U.S. But I think very much that kind of community engagement, engaging stakeholders at all levels is really very much like the methodology of a health impact assessment, which is a very prescriptive tool, though it has lots of flexibility. So that gives a little history of why our organization finds it to be so valuable. It's stakeholder driven. It engages community and engaged decision makers at all levels. It brings all of these people to the table, essentially, to have a conversation, to try to think about the best ways to inform a decision in whatever direction. And it may not stop a decision from happening, but it does inform the decision so that health is bears weight in the conversation around a potentially non-health-based decision. The picture that you'll see here on the front slide here is of the Shawnee Fossil Plant. This is a current health impact assessment project that we're undertaking, and I'll get a little bit more into it later. But just wanted to give you some context for the plant that we're looking at. So when it comes to health impact assessment, we look at health as a state of complete physical, mental, and social well-being, and not merely the absence of disease or infirmity. This is a concept used by the World Health Organization with the intention that it takes into account factors that influence health, that have a significant impact on health, and that can include education, it can include access to health care, access to information, access to income. And so the idea is that You're not looking at sort of the minute picture of health, but looking at the big picture and looking at it collectively. This is a summary adapted from, I believe, the International Health Association. I'm not sure what IAIA is, but the combination, a health impact assessment is the combination of procedures, methods, and tools that systematically judges the potential and sometimes unintended effects of a proposed project, plan, or policy on the health of a population and the distribution of those effects within the population. So it's looking at varying degrees across the different strata. It also identifies appropriate actions to manage those health effects. About 4 years ago, Kentucky Environmental Foundation started looking into doing a health impact assessment of coal and clean energy options in Kentucky. This was something that seemed to be missing in the conversation around energy and health issues in our state. There seemed to be a partition between economic health and environmental health, and not physical health, that both the environment and economy play an important role. So we broke down as much as we could all of the information that we could gather around the health impacts along the entire life cycle of coal and try to put it into one consolidated conversation. And then we did the same thing for renewable energy options for our state, including solar and wind and hydro, and tried to account for health impacts that might be associated with those things. And try to have a balanced picture. The intention was that this would inform a piece of legislation called the Clean Energy Opportunity Act that was intended, continues to be intended to increase our state's investment in renewable energy and energy efficiency, which is currently about 2%. It would bump it up to between 10 and 12%. This little infographic is helpful, and it gives kind of a general synopsis of some of the issues that we face with the coal life cycle. We talk about clean coal, and when we talk about clean coal, we tend to focus, that the clean element to it is that we're capturing emissions. This image broadens the reality that we're looking at health impacts along its entire life cycle. So from mountaintop removal and the associated cancer clusters in those areas, water contamination, and then underground mining, the associations of silicosis and injuries. It's one of the most dangerous sources of employment out there, second only after agriculture. And you move along the life cycle, and then after transportation, which is 70% of transportation in the U.S. On U.S. rail traffic is for carrying coal, which has its own sets of risks, and then the combustion of coal within a power plant has its own sets of health concerns. There's also the byproducts that we have to deal with that aren't listed here when it comes to managing coal ash, and this is a conversation that is very pertinent right now as the EPA has to make a decision on how coal ash will be managed by December of this year. This is a part of, well, in the process of health impact assessment, you gather all the information that you can. You try to gather the most scientific information, and you try to gather both the qualitative information and the quantitative. So with the first health impact assessment that we did, we used available data. This is from the Clean Air Task Force. They have an updated map. This is the one we included in our report. And as we see, we look at the state of Kentucky and also up in Michigan. We're sort of sitting in the middle of the smoking section, as we say, when it comes to power plants. There's high levels of mortality and morbidity associated with these power plants, associated with the emissions, particularly particulate matter and ozone. And within our assessment, we also found that there was research on what shifting from a mining or a coal-based industry towards a renewable energy industry might look like, and this particular research looked at that shifting towards cleaner energy would improve the health of 700,000 workers and potentially eliminate 1,300 worker deaths over the coming decade due to reduced risk of energy extraction. So that was our initial health impact assessment. We looked to the Pew Charitable Trust for a partnership, and were funded through their health impact assessment program. I encourage anyone that is interested in doing a health impact assessment to look to the Health Impact Project as a partnership. They are excellent partners, and through the process, they provide a technical associate to walk you through the process. The first health impact assessment we did in partnership with Berea College, and so we had the benefit of engaging students in the process. These students, many of them had family and relatives across the state. Those students were able to do interviews and do the kind of qualitative research that we couldn't have done as an organization. So that was fantastic to plug in their research. With this particular project, we were looking more specifically at one particular power plant. And to give you a little background, the 5 basic steps of a health impact assessment are a screening phase, a scoping phase, a screening phase to decide if the project is worth investing the time and energy, a scoping phase to look at the breadth of what you want to study, an assessment phase where you go and you collect your data and you crunch your numbers, and then you create recommendations out of that, and it's followed up by a monitoring stage to make sure that recommendations are implemented in some fashion. A little background on the health impact assessment for the Shawnee Fossil plant. This plant is owned and operated by the Tennessee Valley Authority. It's located near the industrial community of Paducah, Kentucky. The 56-year-old coal-fired power plant requires upgrades, and that was the decision point that we were hinging our project on. They are facing, they're in the process of upgrading from to include sulfur dioxide retrofit to meet mercury and air toxic standards. The plant also, however, because it's a rather old plant, they also have faced the risk of having to retire the plant just due to the general nature of the plant is reaching near the end of its life cycle. It employs 250 workers in the community, and it has historically been a supplier of energy to the nearby retiring uranium enrichment facility. This is a big concern for the community because the uranium enrichment plant provided over 1,300 jobs. So the community is already strapped in terms of employment. This power plant was used to power the uranium enrichment plant's operations, and then is now connected to the broader TVA grid. So in terms of power distribution, it's unknown whether the plant really plays an important role in that part of the grid. The USEC plant took up about 5%, which is significant, 5% of TVA's entire load that as a customer. So it was a very big consumer of energy, and now that's been cut from being online. In our screening process, we addressed the fact that TVA has to retrofit the Shawnee Fossil plant to meet the new EPA standards for SO2. We were looking at the fact that the community relies heavily on industrial jobs, but we're also looking at the environmental pollution that coal plants are a significant source of environmental pollution. We were also looking at how TVA determines the future of its operations on its integrated resource plan, balancing costs of various energy sources with upcoming regulations. So we kind of did a 3-part process to our HIA because we felt like it was a little bit short-sighted to focus just on the plant, when the bigger issue was once the plant closes down, that has a significant economic impact on the community. And how will TVA continue to offset their coal-based energy with clean energy, which is a much healthier source of power. in our second stage here of scoping, we decided to focus on how health will be impacted, to look at how health will be impacted by dry sorbent injection technology or other retrofits to address the MAT standards. And we were looking at air emissions and health, water quality and health, and employment and health. We also decided to look at what are the healthiest energy options available for TVA's portfolio. The scoping process included looking at a current status of health in the region, how might it be impacted by Shawnee's operations, and how it's affected by the TVA's IRP. So it has sort of a local influence on local health when it comes to economic health and air quality. And then it moves to the more regional concept of health, because we know that emissions coming out of the stack are not going to stay put. That certainly has relevance now that the EPA has backed the cross-state air pollution rules most recently. And we also looked at how health will be impacted if the Shawnee plant retires. We know that unemployment may lead to other health issues, including those associated with access to nutrition, housing, and income for schools and for other things like roads and safety and police forces. Improvements in air and water quality may reduce certain environmentally based diseases, which improve air, but the continued operations have implications as well in terms of their impact on water quality and continued emissions. So that defined our scoping process. Let me back up a little bit. There was one thing I meant to say, was that health impact assessments are tools, as a tool has been used more recently in the last 10 years in the US, but has been implemented for quite some time across Europe. And so it's sort of a growing field in the US. And there has not been a whole lot of health impact assessments done on energy. I think that was one of the reasons that Pew was interested in partnering with this project, because it allowed for an expansion in that area. The parts of our assessment that we involved included a literature review. Much of that looked at data on health impacts of emissions and health impacts of water quality. We looked for any kinds of health impacts associated with unemployment and income. We looked at impacts from education and the benefits of a strong police force and good road safety. We incorporated our qualitative process, involved listening circles, and this was our attempt to reach out to the community and get their input. We had a small response for the listening circles, but we gained some valuable input. We understood from those listening circles that the priority of the community, regardless of environmental concerns, remained to be on jobs and employment. So if there's going to be any kind of transition, the community wants to make sure that jobs stay a priority. We also found out that TVA employees have little understanding, or at least one that was involved with the decommissioning process, which could provide some source of income if the TVA faces retirement of the plant. They may be able to engage employees to decommission the plant. We also engaged one-on-one interview process, reaching out to the local Purchase Area Development District, to the county judge executive, to local union workers, and tried to engage folks that way. Listening circles engaged folks that included nurses and local community members that were retired, included some civic leaders. So the goal was to have as many different individuals involved in the process as possible. We also employed a a company, Synapse Economics, to do a local economic analysis on the impact of plant closure on the community. This analysis looked at what potential benefits might come out of doing the retrofits and the jobs that would be gained through that process. It also looked at what will happen if the plant chooses, if TVA chooses a retirement scenario for their plant, and how many jobs would be lost, as well as the combined economic impact of that decision. I included this as sort of a snapshot of part of our assessment process was digging out as much data as we could. This gives a general image of air quality, and air quality in McCracken County is poor. It actually has had an F ranking for the recent release by the American Lung Association, and had high levels of ozone over the past year, which is a byproduct of nitrogen oxides, and it has particulate matter that's of a concern for the community. We used information that was compiled by the Sierra Club. This is an image of the plant and its proximity to Paducah. And then we overlaid schools and the community. This particular model looks at sulfur dioxide and was an evaluation of compliance with 1 hour ambient air quality standards for sulfur dioxide. And as you can see, so that it crosses both Kentucky and Illinois. And the schools in blue are in Illinois, those in pink are in Kentucky. But there's, I believe it's F, if you all can see that one. That's the brand new high school. It's a consolidated school that was just constructed in the for the county high school system, and it's well within this sort of plume of modeled of sulfur dioxide, and shows that when there are exceedances, that's certainly concern for those that are have concerns around asthma. We also worked with the health department. They helped conduct a community health survey, and one of the things that remains to be a concern within the community is asthma. So it was a good conversation point about what we can do to try to address air quality issues, regardless of what TVA decides to do with their plant.
Deborah?
Yes?
Can you go back to the last slide?
Sure.
So I've never seen a map like this before. Maybe Brad or Stephanie has, but like, where did you get the 1 hour this modeled map?
So this modeling was done on. It's done on AirMod, which is an EPA model. It was they contracted out with Lakes Environmental Software to do it, but it's available technology. It's using an available EPA methodology, and that's how the numbers were crunched. That's the science behind this particular model, is that it's a methodology that is used by EPA.
Okay, thank you. I just wondered in terms of, I think it's really powerful to see something like this. You know, if you live in any of those concentric circles.
Exactly.
That's really interesting. So I just kind of wondered where, you know, how do we do that? Thank you.
And the Sierra Club has done a number of these. You might check and see if they've done any in Michigan. One of the concerns in the community was the level of mercury, both air quality and water quality concerns. When it comes to mercury, the most common way that mercury moves from coal into the body is through emissions that end up raining down into water sources where it's converted by microbes into methylmercury, and then is consumed up the food chain by fish, and then we consume the fish, and then we end up with loads of mercury that are not healthy for us. There is a lake that is, let me back up one. It's not visible on this particular map. I think it might be in the future. Here we go. This is a map at the Shawnee Fossil Plant, and are you able to see the cursor moving? Regardless, on the left, yes, the right hand side of the screen is a lake called Metropolis Lake, and this lake is has a fish advisory for both mercury and PCBs. The PCBs are left from are likely contamination concern from the uranium enrichment plant, but the groundwater flow has both mercury and PCBs. An additional assessment that was done, and we were thankful for all of the parties that had done their various assessments. We couldn't have done this without partnerships with Sierra Club and with Earth Justice and Clean Air Task Force, and using the data and the information they had pulled together with their own reports. This particular report showed where there was leaching of coal ash into groundwater and into a number of 4 different aquifers in the area, and then provided some recommendations about how to manage that coal ash. One of the concerns with dry sorbent injection technology, which is the sulfur dioxide retrofit technology that had been selected by Shawnee, is that it increases the acidity of ash, which can potentially increase the leaching of ash. The plant that the current management of coal ash for this plant is just 2 settling ponds, and so the concern that effluent can leach heavy metals quickly and flow straight out into the river is a concern. This was the economic analysis carried out by Synapse Economics, and this first chart looks at employment, both direct, net direct, and indirect, and induced employment impacts of retiring Shawnee. So this is looking at numbers. If you keep the plant operating as usual, you end up with an additional 460 jobs plus in 2015. 2014 is not expected to have any change. This is if there's a decision to do anything with the plant next year, and then the numbers of jobs that go associated with the different types of emission controls, as well as the indirect and induced employment impacts. And these kinds of jobs include what might happen to the gas station down the road, that if the plant retired, they would lose business. So this has calculated those numbers as well. And this was a financial price tag that was associated with that. So the interesting conversation that resulted from both of this set of data as well as the plume of sulfur dioxide was that with one of the city council members is that he said he could look at the plume and he could be concerned, but when it came to economic numbers that came up into the $60 million range, it was just too frightening for him, and that TVA needed to be doing whatever they could to keep the plant open. One of the challenges with that is that TVA may not find it financially effective to keep the plant open, and so what does that mean for the community? What kinds of planning can happen for those kinds of transitions? And I think this was a very important piece of information to try to start having that conversation. So when it came to recommendations, these are all currently tentative recommendations. We have submitted the assessment and the recommendations to TVA to get their feedback, and we find it really important that they have been willing to have a conversation with us along the entire line. Because the health impact assessments only create recommendations, not mandates, they're only as effective as the stakeholders are willing to buy into it. Some recommendations may be really basic, and some of them may be much more expensive and therefore not implemented. But the recommendations will ultimately be shared with the Shawnee Fossil plant managers regarding health issues related to water quality and leaching, TVA board of directors regarding the healthy energy options, and much of that will go to the IRP decision-making process, and then to local community leaders around economic transitions. These are examples of recommendations that were developed. And the first one I think will actually be implemented, which was exciting. We had buy-in from both the school administrator and the local health department. And for bad air quality days, the recommendation was the schools should monitor air quality daily. And the justification was on bad air quality days, McCracken County has levels of air pollution that place sensitive populations at risk. The actors are school administrators as well as the public health department. And the sample strategy that was developed is that the air quality would be monitored online daily with the AQI, which is the air quality index, and activities may be determined by the color code of the index. So currently teachers, particularly sports coaches, have to check the heat index. It would be on a daily basis when they have their players playing outside. This would be the same kind of thing, except that they would be looking at the air quality index. And so the recommendation would be to follow whatever kind of strategy had been recommended by the physician. On an orange day, that might mean that kids with asthma take their inhaler before they go outside. On a red air day, it means that nobody plays outside because the air quality is too poor. So it's basically just increasing awareness around a source of pollution and how to manage that in an individual's daily life. When a recommendation that came out from water quality is that if the DSI is installed, do additional metals remediation to ash to reduce leaching. Health may be impacted by consumption of water contaminated by heavy metals. The actor to implement this would be TVA, and there were a number of recommended strategies that included the use of flocculants. This is the kind of recommendation that TVA may or may not support according to what federal legislation requires them to do. They may find it to be too expensive. Much of this may be impacted and influenced by the upcoming decision on the management of coal ash. This recommendation was made because it matters to health, and it doesn't matter how much it costs. We get to make that recommendation because health is the priority here. We're looking at recommendations around employment. If the plant decides to retire, a recommendation was to hire as many employees as possible to work the decommissioning process. Employment plays an important role in maintaining health, and a strategy would be to connect existing Shawnee plant employees with the decommissioning operations. It wouldn't employ all the employees, but it would possibly utilize a third to maybe half of the ones that are still there. And then in the area of economic development, one particular example of a recommendation was that TVA should provide the Purchase Area Development District sufficient time, at least a year if possible, to acquire funding to help facilitate transitions for employees. This is the kind of mitigation scenario where if we plan for the future, then we won't have the same kind of situation that resulted from the uranium enrichment plant closing. There is a big political push to keep the uranium enrichment plant going, and rather than investing resources into transition, as soon as the plant closed, there was really not a significant package of ideas and steps forward to be able to accommodate the 1,300 employees that were being laid off. This was also intended to help build communication between TVA and the Purchase Area Development District. And then the last step of this process will involve a monitoring plan. The intention is to make sure that local stakeholders are maintaining communication with TVA via board meetings and the company liaison that we have, and to meet with local businesses and community leaders to build health values into future economic development. Another recommendation that we talked about was this is an area that has a significant amount of industry and has historically had a significant amount of environmental health issues. Some of these are cancer related, some of them are cardio and respiratory concerns. One thing that I did not include in this particular presentation was the results of the community health survey when it came to values. And some of the values that the community was most concerned about included diseases that are frequently associated with environmental concerns: cancer, cardiovascular disease, respiratory disease. However, when it came to priorities, a clean environment was next to last on their priority list, and employment was on the top of the list. So figuring out how to start making that connection between a clean environment and a healthy environment and good jobs, and trying to promote industry that will help alleviate some of the existing environmental health concerns in the area. That's one of the recommendations. That concludes my presentation, but I would really be happy to take questions and to further flesh out some ideas if there are any, if anyone would like to hear more.
Well, thank you, Deborah. That was extremely informative. I think at least from my perspective, and I've done some work looking at health impact assessments, but not a ton, was the extent to which, I was struck by the extent to which you talked about some of the economic concerns around this work, which is certainly a topic of interest here in Michigan and relevant to, as I mentioned, Brad Ben Gilder and I talked earlier today about some of the work we do here in Michigan, and labor issues came up a couple times. I'm curious to hear a little bit more, and forgive me on this. Can you first describe a little bit more about how the TVA, the Tennessee Valley Authority, the structure of that in terms of, is that what kind of a utility is that considered, and talk a little bit more about how the health impact assessment has changed your ability to have conversations about this with people in decision making, whether they're elected officials or non-elected officials. Does that question make sense?
Sure, and I'll answer, and then you can, if it doesn't make sense, I mean, my response is not helpful, you can clarify more. So the Tennessee Valley Authority is a federally owned and operated energy company. It crosses, I want to say 7 states. I could be wrong, something that I should know. But across the Southeast, Tennessee, Kentucky, Alabama, Georgia, Mississippi, and maybe down into Florida. I can follow back up with that, but they have a diverse array of energy sources. They manage a significant number of rivers and lakes for hydro-based electricity. They have a portion that's nuclear-based energy, and they are looking within their portfolio to shift, as they say that they are agnostic around their energy sources. So they're looking to move towards reducing coal and increasing natural gas, just because it's a fuel that transitions away relatively easily when it comes to cutting costs and cutting emissions. What was the second part of your question?
Well, it's complicated. I'm curious. Here in Michigan, we have a kind of combination of we have some municipal utilities, some as well as some big, large utility players like a DTE or Consumers Energy, um, and then we also have a renewable portfolio standard, which I don't believe Kentucky has. But so we both, when we think about like decision making levers um, around coal-fired power plants in Michigan, I think we have a couple different targets, and those are the utility companies, and sometimes that's different because they're either municipal or they're some of these larger players. We have legislators who might be thinking about our state's overall energy policy strategy, and then we have some federal targets like I think we all have, but I'm just kind of curious of like how the first HIA and maybe even the HIA you're working on right now with the Shawnee plant, how it's helped move forward some of those conversations with some of those targets in terms of taking these kinds of plants offline.
So I would say I think that in terms of health impact assessments, I think the most valuable thing is that it builds conversation. I don't think that it necessarily helps take a plant offline, but what it does do is inform any kind of decision. I think it was really helpful in terms of having a conversation with our Secretary of Energy, Lynn Peters, for our first health impact assessment, because we had physicians involved in the conversation. We had a lot more response. We set up a meeting, and we had 2 physicians and a nurse, and I. We thought we were just meeting with the secretary, and by the time we got there, they had 8 people around the table to have a conversation with us. And some of that may have been maybe I don't think they knew what we were trying to do, but the whole point of the conversation was to make sure that health was a priority. And I think because we had physicians that were engaged, we were able to come to the table. I think this is the kind of thing that informs is really important because it pulls a lot of data together. It pulls science together, and that kind of thing can influence decisions with various decision makers. When science is involved, it has a lot stronger argument than a qualitative argument, which is unfortunate, but it does. So I think that's, I'm not sure if that's helpful. It's certainly not a black and white process, and I think that has its benefits. We were able to have a conversation with the Tennessee Valley Authority because of the sort of non-confrontational methodology of a health impact assessment. We invited them to be a part of the process, and they declined. We went ahead and started the process, and they realized it would be to their benefit to be involved, and so they set up a liaison to be engaged in the process. So I hope that helps maybe explain how it's beneficial. It opens doors to conversations, I think.
I think that's really helpful, and I think that's, oh.
This is Brad Vangler. I guess I've been unmuted, so do you mind if I ask a question?
Please.
Certainly, go ahead.
So in the health impact assessment that you were looking at, were you attempting to have the HIA become a part of an integrated part of the IRP process, so that when they're essentially making an evaluation of their planning, that they're taking into account the health costs as part of the larger larger context of evaluating how they're going to go moving forward with how they're going to be, the TVA is going to be providing power in the future, so it gives you a much larger picture than just purely the cost of producing electricity, but really the larger cost of health costs and the balancing off of various economic effects, so that you have a much larger picture of what the integrated resource planning process really is being applied to.
So sure, that's we have submitted comments already to the first stage of their integrated resource plan, and then when they have that's sort of for this their scoping section. It's up to TVA to decide if they want to incorporate those recommendations. I think having a well-founded argument is certainly the only way to make that happen. And I think having a relationship with TVA is an important role. I will not say that health impact assessments, change the operations of a massive federal agency, but they can help inform the decisions of that agency. So with, we do this health impact assessment, and we make these recommendations with a caveat of knowing that the recommendations may or may not be adopted. However, it's a process that is sometimes more fruitful than, say, a lawsuit, because you're having a conversation.
Great.
And it might be different. I mean, TVA is very large. It might be different with a much smaller company. If you have a really good relationship with your local power company, it may be a different scenario.
Well, I mean, TVA is a kind of a unique situation with it being this large federal bureaucracy, and I don't even know is it essentially self-regulating, because it's not like a for-profit utility where you like the DTE and consumers in Michigan, where you have the Michigan Public Service Commission that essentially is the regulatory body that would consider their costs and cost implications.
Yeah, there's certainly sort of two different sizes. One of the earliest health impact assessments done by Dr. Aaron Warnham up in Alaska was looking at the development of power, and I think it was an oil pipeline up in Alaska. And I'm not sure, I think some things were adopted in terms of modifications around how the plant was structured and located and all of that. It did not change the development of the project, but it did help influence modifications of the development of that process. So those are, health impact assessments don't necessarily shut down a power plant. What they do is help inform decisions around that, whether the plant continues to operate or whether it retires. It's a slightly different approach to addressing the health impacts of or the operations of a power plant.
This is Rory. I'm just kind of curious, and you talked about this the first time we chatted, but could you comment on your efforts to engage physicians and health professionals in this process, and then also kind of how you found, Brad and I were talking earlier today about we think we want to do something like this in here in Michigan, but we don't necessarily have qualified people that we think can actually do the health impact assessment. So I have two questions. The first one is any advice or comments on engaging health professionals in the actual process, and the second question is finding the folks who can actually have experience doing health impact assessments and how you found them in Kentucky.
When it came to our relationships with physicians, a lot of that just comes down to basic networking and reaching out to organizations, connecting to people, and then being connected by those people. We had a physician in Lexington, which is in central Kentucky, and he was part of the Kentucky Medical Association. He knew of a practitioner in Louisville who was starting an environmental medicine committee in Louisville. He ended up being a great ally and does a lot of work for us. So that's the kind of process that we've engaged people. We find that nurses, frequently there's a lot more nurses out there that are activists and that can do some reaching out. That's basically how we got connected. If you don't have any place to start, I would look to your local medical associations and ask if they have any environmental committees, if there's anyone that's already looking at those kinds of things. The Environmental Medicine Committee in Louisville was initially looking at lead and asbestos and those kinds of things that are pretty basic concerns for environmental health. There were a couple of people, however, that were looking outside that box and looking at concerns around air quality and air pollution, particularly when it comes to power-based air pollution. That's the strategy that we followed for connecting with our health professionals. And sort of keep knocking on doors, and for every 9 that aren't interested, there's typically maybe 1 that is. Physicians are so busy that sometimes it's a matter of having, if you want them to provide a statement, you have the statement already geared up, and you give them the data and you give them all the science and make sure that all the science is solid for them, and then you let them go. Physicians for Social Responsibility has a lot of great material that's already sort of prepackaged, and that's a really great tool for doing that kind of outreach. There was a second part of your question that I don't remember. Oh, in terms of doing, finding someone to help implement the health impact assessment. Kentucky Environmental Foundation hired me to sort of try to create this health focus within the organization, but the process I don't think is so technical that someone that doesn't have a health background can't do it. It's not designed to be rocket science. It's designed to be an available kind of methodology that health can be incorporated through non-health health-focused employees. You can look to your health department, see if there's someone there that might be interested in this kind of conversation. Look to your local nurses association. The grant provides sufficient funding for someone to at least part-time employment, and mine has been between 60 and 90% of my time has gone to this health impact assessment. So the funding, if you ended up being funded by Pew, there's sufficient funding to help walk someone through that process through the year, and the technical advisors that they provide really help guide any individual that heads up the health impact assessment. Was that helpful?
So is it possible then that
Absolutely.
if there's someone who's interested in developing this as a skill, that they would actually be able to have the resources available from Pew to help them develop this as a skill to pull all the different pieces together in a way that's recognized as a standard format?
Yes, and there's actually folks that work in this field are rather helpful. Even if you don't get funded to do an assessment, it takes a lot of time. Just because you do a lot of footwork, you do a lot of research and a lot of writing, and maybe the funding can come from another source, but there are a lot of resources out there and examples that if someone were interested in doing this kind of project, the resources are available. One place to start is to go to Health Impact Project, which is the Pew funded project. There's also Human Impact Partners have a great stockpile of information on health impact assessments that they have helped facilitate and resources. If you go to the World Health Organization, you can find some from a more international perspective. But there are a lot out there. I mean, the basic 5 steps have some components to it. Doing a literature review, which requires someone with some research background to know how to interpret science. But a lot of it is just, conducting listening circles and doing that with an approach that's diplomatic and some pretty common sense outreach and making sure that you're connecting as many dots as you can. It's an involved process, but it's not a technically difficult process. And it also can have, I feel like in retrospect that maybe the scope of our project was big. I think it can be scaled back significantly. It can be, look at something as simple as doing how you develop a sidewalk in a neighborhood. It can, and look at the implementation of an additional healthy snacks at a school. It can take on all sorts of different forms. It can also, there's also methodology to do rapid HIA, which basically looks, which is something that takes a much shorter process, and there's methodology out there for that, which is frequently applied to permitting. So a city's permitting process. There's also a national HIA call that I can send you the information for, and if they're on Wednesdays, I think maybe once or twice a month, and they basically give each month someone gives a synopsis of their most recent health impact assessment, and that can give you other ideas and perspectives of how other folks have done health impact assessments in the past.
I would certainly be open to getting that information as we continue to talk about this here in Michigan. That would be helpful.
Sure.
Brad, Stephanie, anybody else questions? Well, it's almost 7:30. I bet everyone is really tired. Yeah, exactly. Deborah, this was really helpful. I have you can't see my office, but I pulled off one of those giant sticky notes that 3M makes, so you can post on your wall, and took a bunch of notes on it while you were talking, and flagged a bunch of things for your presentation. And so I just want to say thank you so much for helping fill my brain with more questions. I think you're inspiring some action here in Michigan. So we deeply appreciate all that you've done, and again, thank you for your time. I know you're very busy like the rest of us are. So thank you for doing this. Stephanie, thank you for hosting it, and Brad, thanks for your questions. Without any other comments, I'll pause for a second, but other than that, I think we're good to go. I'll have a fun and wild Thursday night.
Thank you, and please feel free to reach out to me. I'm really happy to answer more questions or direct you to someone if I don't know the answers.
Oh, that actually does